Thank you very much. Quite wonderful to be back. These lawns of my childhood. Anyway, I'm glad to be speaking after Shopunda, who actually I'm very fond of. But the good thing with going after after Shopunda is that he ad-libs so much that it is so easy to just, pick up like so. So when Dada says three things, he says, in this city in 1894, actually no, Dada, Chandranath Bosu wrote it not in 1894, it was 1892. Then he says, my non-vegetarian something. I love it. It is actually our Hinduism, Shopunda, that allows you to eat that chicken patty here and not say anything about it, because if it was your Hindutva 1 kilometer away in the Calcutta Maidan, just for eating that chicken patty, your brothers might have beaten you to pulp. Right? You tell us about that half-educated Babu who ate beef. And I remember reading quite a few columns about your beef-eating history in Oxford. But be that as it may, let me get to the point. So let us start. I think it's actually quite wonderful that we are having this debate in Calcutta. Even with all the Ghuspetias in the audience, I think it is one of the few cities in which we can have this debate today. Because both Hinduism and the word Hindutva can be traced back to two Bengali gentlemen at either end of the long 19th century. One is Dr. Raja Ram Mohan Roy, to whom, as an English word, Hinduism is traced back to in 1816. And he took it to mean a fairly capacious term for the diverse spiritual traditions deriving from the Vedantic corpus. But then we go on to Chandranath Bosu. And Chandranath Bosu invented, I say the word invented, coined Hindutva in 1892. He's also, like Savarkar, has a very interesting history, and not a lot of people know about it, because when my colleague, Mr. Manishankar Iyer, was talking about 1923, yes, Savarkar wrote his book in 1923, but way before that, 30 years before that, in 1892 was when the term Hindutva was coined in this city. And Chandranath was a native of Hooghly. It's a place from which Shopunda likes to fight elections and often lose them. But he was a native of Hooghly, and he graduated from Presidency College. And equally proficient in English and Bangla, served as a deputy magistrate in Dhaka, and then was an official translator to the Bengal government for over 30 years. He originally wrote in English, and then he wrote a review in Bengali of Krishnakanter Will, which caught Rishi Bonkim's eye, and Bonkim Da, I'm sure our Prime Minister wouldn't mind me referring to him since he set the tone like the same way. So when Bonkim Chandra Chattopadhyay read the review, he encouraged him to say, why don't you write in Bengali? So he starts writing in Bongo Darshan, which by the way is the same literary magazine in which the first two stanzas of Bande Mataram were first published in 1875. So Chandranath, while his time in presidency, used to frequent Brahmo discussions and was quite sort of liberal. But then he meets this very orthodox Brahmin Pundit called Shashodhar Tarkachuramuni in Bonkim Chandra Chatterjee's house. And he returns to religious scriptures with a passion. And he starts advocating a very rigid sort of return to religious scriptures. He writes something called Poshupati Sangbad, then writes something called Shakuntala Tattva. And again, there in Shakuntala Tattva, he very interestingly compares Kalidas's Shakuntala to Shakespeare's Juliet, and he highlights the victory of self-restraint and penance, which he calls dharma, over the uncontrolled and unbridled love, which he calls adharma. So Omiya Prasad Sen, the prominent historian who just passed away, he said that Chandranath's work was a thoughtless application of hardcore orthodoxy, where he was trying to find conservative values where none existed. Anyway, in 1892, Chandranath produces his magnum opus, which is called Hindutva, Hindur Prokrito Itihash. And that is where the term Hindutva first comes in. And this envelops a sort of variety of traditional and often very contradictory beliefs. Chandranath goes on to portray Hindus as fundamentally superior to people of all other faiths, says Hindu traditions are superior to Western culture, says India shall not be a homeland for foreign religions like Islam and Christianity. He says Tantra is an integral part of Hinduism. It represents an inherent Hindu manliness and vigor. And he then writes 2 pamphlets, and for all the women in the audience, you'll quite enjoy it. I mean, it's quite peachy. In these pamphlets, Chandranath says, he says, the superiority of the Hindu woman is in her dedication to cooking in the kitchen for long hours because she can take the heat and smoke. He then writes Savitri Tattva. He says Savitri is the ideal Hindu wife. And then besides this, the other interesting things he did, again, I'm speaking here on the second oldest club led by, for the first time, a lady. He supported child marriage. He says this led to the development of the ideal housewife. He prized female chastity as a social gift, mind you. He opposed reforms in female education. He opposed widow remarriage. He dissented against the 1891 Consensual Age of Consent Act, which raised the age of sexual intercourse consent for women from 10 to 12, which said that, it would be rape if it was more than under the age of between 10 and 12. He says, no, the age of 10 is absolutely okay. So this is his concept of Hindutva. This is the man who gave us Hindutva. And this is what you're proud of. But Chandranath, for all his faults, his Hindutva was confined to a religious, a scriptural, and a literary framework. Then what happens? Then comes along 1923. Who do we have? We have Vinayak Damodar Savarkar. He is the one who gives Hindutva the core political spin. If it weren't for him, we wouldn't have all the Ghuspaitias in the audience, because Chandranath's Hindutva was actually quite boring, It was Savarkar who tied this Hindutva to a theory of monolithic Indian nationalism, this territorial, racial, cultural, political nationalism that had no room for Islam, it had no room for Christianity, no other form of consciousness that couldn't be traced back to a Hindu core. Now, it's also important to note here that the very word Hindu is not in the Vedas. It's not in the Upanishads. It's not in any Vedantic Upanishadic corpus. It's not in the epics. It's not in the Dharma Shastras. It's not in any major Sanskrit or Prakrit literary text. It is not even in the majority of the Puranas. Savarkar relied on a fake Purana. And the reason I call it a fake Purana was because it is called the Bhavishya Purana. And the reason I call it a fake Purana was in this Purana you have reference to Sunday, Monday, Tuesday as days of the week and reference to Queen Victoria. Now Queen Victoria's timeline was 1819 to 1901. So if any Purana which made a reference to this had to be a fake Purana. And then Savarkar, what he says is, he says militarized Hinduism and Hinduized militarism. When after Savarkar pleads with the British, gets a get out of jail free card, remember he goes out and he boycotts the Quit India movement. When Gandhiji calls for the Quit India movement in 1942, Savarkar's boycotting it. He's head of the Hindu Mahasabha. He boycotts it and he is asking members of the Hindu Mahasabha, please get into the British army. And he uses the term Hinduized militarism and militarized Hinduism. This is his idea of Hindutva. It is political, racial, cultural. It has nothing to do with either religion or spirituality, which is what Hinduism as we know it is. And when you talk of, Shapunda again was referring to this, Savarkar actually wrote, he said, he hated Muslims, but he said that the one good thing about Muslims is when you're talking about Muslims in the medieval age, they went around raping all these Hindu women and giving birth to more and more Muslims. And Hindus should actually take a leaf out of that book, because this suicidal Hindu idea of chivalry, of treating enemy women with respect, was going to do no good for the predominance of the Hindu race. Now, as Hindus, we can accept a diversity of practices under rubric Hinduism as a modern concept, and we can argue about how liberal it is, how open it is. On one side, you can have the spirituality of Ramakrishna Dev, which is highly accommodative. You have Belur Mott that has Jishu Pujo, which has Jishu Utsav, where you have a aroti done with cake and flowers, and, that's on one side. Where he regarded even Jesus as a form of divinity, which was absolutely okay with Ramakrishna. He saw no conflict in that. And, but even the RSS, I would say, they do not confuse Hindutva with a religion. Hindutva is a political expression that seeks to consolidate Hindus in an exclusionary platform that is adversarial. That is the soul. If there is one word that is the divide between Hinduism on one side and Hindutva on the other, it was adversarial. Hindutva believes that as a political platform, mine is the only way, and Hinduism believes as a religion and a spiritual platform that there is room for a lot of others along the way. So for instance, while there's some Hindu practices, 1 minute, where Hindu practices and Hinduism can imagine love between Hindus and Muslims, a Hindutva practitioner will say, no, this is love jihad. So a Bengali Hindu eating meat will offer meat to Ma Kali, but a practitioner of Hindutva will say that's not on. So a Hindu doesn't need to bother about the fact that there are lots of things that we do, including imagining Ma Kali in a form and referring to Krishna as the love of my life. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not blasphemy. But for a Hindutva, that is blasphemy. So the core question here is, does Hinduism need to protect itself from Hindutva? I would say that the best way to continue to protect Hinduism is to continue to realize that Hindutva is there because Hindutva was there, because Hinduism was there. Hindu ache bole Hindutva holo. It is not the other way around. So in a way, when Hinduism is religious, it is spiritual, and the only need of the hour is to free it from this Hindutva sort of brand of rabid, noxious political nationalism that has overtaken it. And
we've got to wind up.
Sorry. Mr. Manishankar, I referred to this. I'm going to wind up right here. Now, when we're talking of Calcutta Club, one of the most important things about Calcutta Club that I remember from my childhood used to be the Christmas lunch. And while everyone wore their Santa hats inside, including, I'm sure, Mr. Dasgupta, and enjoyed his turkey and Christmas pudding, you had lots of people going outside and saying, "Oi dekchi shota hocche Calcutta Club. Shekhane elitera boshe Santa tupi pore tara bideshi khabar khaye." But you know what? Even today in Bengal, that same thing has been replicated in Park Street. No one's tried to ruin it, what was happening in Calcutta Club. That's the difference between Hinduism and Hindutva. We have tried to replicate this somewhere else rather than coming in and saying, let's destroy this once and for all. So that's the classic difference between there. Hindutva is there because we as Hinduism allow it to, not the other way around. Thank you so much.
Namaste. I'm grateful to the CTC for giving us this opportunity to discuss on a fundamentally suicidal topic, which is whether Hinduism needs protection from Hindutva. I would like to reformulate it as follows. Hinduism does need protection through Hindutva. And if anything, Hinduism needs protection from secularism. So the good part of going perhaps third in this sequence is that you get the benefit of all the gyan that has been spouted before. So let me start with this. Mr. Kunal Sarkar in the opening introduction of Mr. Iyer mentioned that although he was born on the other side of the border, his heart is here. I think perhaps he's still on the other side of the border, insofar as his worldviews are concerned. For the simple reason that his script, I don't think, has changed in the last half a century, where he still conflates Hindutva and its origins with Savarkar and RSS, despite abundant scholarship saying so to the contrary. Fortunately, I think the saving grace of that side was Ms. Moitra, who finally came back to this land, which is actually the birthplace of Hindutva, to start off with Chandranath Boshu of 1892. Now, she highlighted certain problems with his positions with respect to child marriage, women, so on and so forth. The only question that I have is, can she not think of any other non-Hindu worldview which has a problem with reform? Or which continues to justify child marriage and misogyny in the name of whatever? I would prefer that my head is still stuck to its torso. So I'll leave it at that. Now, this is the problem. So I will split my submission in 3 parts, or perhaps 2 parts, given the paucity of time, because this is not enough, but I'll do my best to actually keep it as short as possible, thanks to the training of the Supreme Court, so keep pace with me. This is the birthplace of Hindutva because colonial power was established in Calcutta. And therefore, starting from the Brahmo movement, with the establishment of the Calcutta Unitarian Committee, with Dwarkanath Tagore, William Adams, and Sri Ram Mohan Roy, not Raja Ram Mohan Roy because that was a Mughal epithet, there was a problem between 1830s and 1860s when they realized that in the hope of succeeding and becoming a part of the colonial establishment, they had no other option but to ape and mimic the ways of the British man. Between 1860s and perhaps 1909 is when the history of Hindutva begins, not in Maharashtra, not with respect to Savarkar, because when this starts or when this history happens, Savarkar I think was born in 1888. And the foundations of Hindutva were established between 1866 and 1909. Starting from the imagery of Bharat Mata that was actually put out in the form of a play or a novel in 1866 by someone who wrote under the pseudonym Krishna Dvaipayana Veda Vyasa. It actually turned out to be Mr. Sudeep Mukhopadhyay, who basically came out with the imagery of Bharat Mata till 1909, which is when the Uttarpara speech of that inconvenient person was delivered, which is Sri Aurobindo. Everybody spoke of Chandranath Basu to Savarkar except Aurobindo, because Aurobindo sticks out as an inconvenient person for those people who are opponents of Hindutva, because I haven't found a more vociferous, ferocious and vehement proponent of Hindutva than Sri Aurobindo. In fact, he saw himself as an intellectual descendant of Swami Vivekananda because he believed that the very same Shakta spirit percolated into him. And this is what he had to say as far as Sanatana Dharma, nationalism and Bharat is concerned. And this I would like to share with the audience. Just give me a moment, and I think this should help. This is from Uttarpara speech. These are the last few lines of his Uttarpara speech. I'll quickly go on to the next point after this. In his speech, he basically makes the point at the end of it. I say that it is Sanatana Dharma which for us is nationalism. This Hindu nation was born with Sanatana Dharma. With it moves and with it it grows. When Sanatana Dharma declines, the nation declines. And if Sanatana Dharma were capable of perishing, with Sanatana Dharma, it would perish, which is the nation. The Sanatana Dharma, that is nationalism, that is the message I have to speak to you. This is Sri Aurobindo, the former revolutionary turned rishi. Let me try and contextualize Hindutva for Bengal, because this is your product. This is the birthplace of Hindutva. Between 1866 and 1909, the rishis of this place, the modern day rishis of this place realize that Hindu society is grasit and eclipsed by two specific invading colonial powers with expansionist mindset and a predatorial mindset. And therefore they decide that we need to respond. And that response also then reverse percolates into Brahmoism, because by 1867 they realize that Brahmoism is taking people away from Hindu Dharma and it is becoming a Western mimicry and is refashioning Hinduism through a Western lens. And therefore response starts, and guess who starts with the response? Debendranath Tagore starts the Hindu Mela, which subsequently becomes the Jatiya Mela around 1867. Which is why, if you were to take a look at the views of Sri Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Dwarkanath Tagore, you will see a stark difference between their positions to Debendranath Tagore and then to Rabindranath Tagore, by which time Rabindranath Tagore had recrafted what he called Hindu Brahmoism, because he wanted to take it away from Protestant Christian roots and bring it back to Hindu Dharma. This was the response. And then comes, according to me, the patron saint of nationalism, Swami Vivekananda. I'm happy that Sri Iyer spoke of his speech, which was delivered in 1893 at the Parliament of Religions in Chicago. And tomorrow being that great soul's birth anniversary, I would request people to actually go through that speech, because in that speech, Swami Vivekananda does not leave the opportunity to talk about the brutality and savagery that we have suffered at the hands of Islamic invasions. He says so in 1893 in Chicago. So we are constantly pitted in these kind of binaries. Hindutva and Hinduism are not binaries. Where does this word come from? I'm happy that Ms. Moitra actually mentioned Shakuntala Tattva and all other works of Sri Chandranath Basu. So when he was writing these series of tattvas, he also came out with Hindutva, because Hindutva, according to him, was a portmanteau of Hinduism or Hindu Dharma and Tattva, and therefore Hindutva. I agree entirely with Swapanda that Hinduism is a 19th century construct because it was refashioned by the British on convenient lines. Until then, the word used for it was Sanatana Dharma. And this became a necessity not only to repel mental colonization, but also to repel physical colonization. Because guess what? By 1902, Anushilan Samiti had to be established by Sri Aurobindo along with others, taking what inspiration from an essay written by Bankim Chandra Chatterjee in 1888 called Anushilan. This is the history of Hindutva in Bengal. When someone tries to tell you that this is a North Indian invention, a vegetarian invention, sorry, this is the organic Shakta response to colonial invasion of Bharat. This is the Shakta response, therefore Hindutva has the blood of the Shaktas. Which is why Hindutva is recrafted and reimagined in the image of Durga Ma. Every revolutionary from this land who was a Shakta was expected to take oath on what? The Gita, and had to say Vande Mataram. Naturally, there were certain people who were excluded because they had problem with both. Therefore, if someone tries to tell you that Hindutva is hyper-masculine, that is because Bengali masculinity informs Hindutva. If someone tells you that Hindutva subscribes to Brahminical vegetarianism, sorry, it worships Durga Ma, and therefore it chadafies two things, meat and alcohol both. 3, wake up and smell the coffee, because this is not the subject of wine tasting discussions, because the neighboring country is doing something which I think will become the near future for us as well. You are living perhaps in the epicenter of the new great game, and if West Bengal does not become the bastion of Hindutva that it once was, then I agree, and borrowing lines from the Bengal files, we will lose the lighthouse of Bharat and the lighthouse of Hindutva. I will end with only one submission. Hindutva is a civilizational imperative, not a political tool, but there is nothing wrong in it being a political tool, because it is ironic for a politician to have a problem with a political tool. I really don't see what is the problem with Hindutva becoming a political tool, because politics is the last mile where you get the job done. But it is fundamentally a civilizational movement which has emanated from the society. Savarkar wrote only in 1922, which was published in 1923. RSS was established on Vijayadashami of 1925. Prior to that, Hindutva has had a history of 70 years. Stop buying this hogwash. Vande Mataram, Jai Shri Ram to the people in power here, and Jai Ma Kamakhya, Jai Ma Kali. Hindutva is the way of the future. This is the writing on the wall which they have a problem with.